And he's here to tell us how to understand this, how to use this power for good, and how we can use our personality types to improve communication in relationships. But Frank, what got you interested in personality types in the first place?
Well, Julie, thank you for having me on the podcast, first of all. What got me into it, it was very accidental. I was just told about it by my brother. He was hanging out with some friends, and he said, "Oh, we were talking about personality types, Myers-Briggs. We think you might be this type." So that was like in the back of my head for a while, simmering, marinating. And after a while, I was like, maybe I should take this test, see what it's all about. I found one online, took it, and I got INFJ as my type. And then I went back to my brother and said, "What type did you say you thought I was?" And he was like, "INFJ." So that was like a moment.
Whoa.
Yeah. That was a moment where I was like, aha, maybe there's something to this. And I just started to research it. And I was going through a period in my life where I was like, I didn't have much else going on. So I was like,
It's like
I,
quarantine. Pick up new
yeah,
things, right?
yeah, exactly. So I was just trying to figure myself out. I was going through kind of like a bit of a rough time, not knowing what I was doing with my life. So it just eventually evolved into me making YouTube videos about it, and then people watched it. So I kept making more, and here I am today.
Nice. So
What are,
before, oh,
go for it.
as we say, before we go into dating with personality types, because that's
Yeah.
obviously why we're here today. But I feel like a lot of people, myself included, might not even know the difference between just like the Myers-Briggs and the wait, how do you
Yeah, the
pronounce it?
Enneagram. Yeah.
Enneagram, the Enneagram. So can you kind of break that down for us?
Yeah, so there's a few different personality systems that people are probably hearing about. Myers-Briggs, I think, is maybe the most popular, and that has 16 types. And it actually goes back to the work of Carl Jung back in the early 1900s, and dividing people up based on their preferences of how they view the world, like how they view reality, and then how they make decisions based on that. And then the Enneagram is a whole different thing that has 9 different types. And that's based more on like your innate fear in life, the thing that's driving
Mm,
you to, the thing you're trying to get away from all the time, and the thing that you're always aspiring toward. And that's very popular as well. And then there's the Big Five, which is a little less sexy, but it's scientific also, where there's 5 personality traits that people can measure to kind of statistically say where you fall relative to everyone else.
got it. So do you have one that you focus on, or are you kind of like an equal opportunity employer
I
here?
like all of them, but I think Myers Briggs is what my biggest interest in, and where most of my expertise is.
Do you remember back in the day when personality types and these personality tests were basically learning about your astrology? I mean, like, I really
Yeah,
think it was just one of those things like you get drunk at a party, you're like, "Oh, hey, what's your personality types?" But then now I think it's so much more prevalent because employers are using it for
right.
their recruiting. People use it for compatibility. Why do you think it's so important to know and recognize your personality type?
Yeah, that's a good point, and a lot of people draw the comparison still to horoscopes, and I think that's because people could take it like a horoscope, where you just take some random test, you read a profile that's very positive and makes you feel good about yourself, and then you're like, "Oh, great, that's my type." Yeah, and then you get drunk at a party and you talk about it. But when you really start to dig into it, it's a really good tool for self-development, figuring out, especially figuring out your blind spots, because with every type, sure, there is a nice profile that says all the things that you do great and why you're a special
Mm,
person, but there is like a dark side to every type, with stuff that they you could say their weaknesses, you could say things that they don't feel responsible for, and so they leave kind of these voids in their life that cause recurring problems. And so I think when you start to uh, really learn like the nuts and bolts of your type, then you can begin a very meaningful journey, if I might use that word, towards
Absolutely.
developing yourself, and becoming like a more well-rounded person who is basically responsible for every area of life when it comes to, how are you taking in information, and then how are you making judgments based on that.
Another
So
tool in your toolbox,
yeah.
basically.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
So we could probably do a whole episode about all the different types of
Yeah,
all the ones you just mentioned. But since Myers-Briggs is kind of your expertise, maybe we'll focus this around that. Can you
sounds
kind
good.
of just like high level break down the 16 personality types, like just in a more summarizing? I know that's probably super hard, but
Yeah, I
Well,
know.
I take
do it in
notes.
2 seconds. I'm just kidding. You more
Well,
than that, but
I guess what I mean, so yeah, I mean, there's so many things that you could go into, and people who know a lot about it would probably I'll explain it in such a way where people who know a lot will be like, that's not the full story, but it's like, you don't need the full story right now.
Hmm.
right.
But
There's other podcasts for that. Yeah.
yeah, other podcasts,
Or
just
your
check out my
YouTube.
channel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So in Myers-Briggs, each type has 4 letters in it. So I said my type is INFJ. So maybe the best way to do it would be to just go through each letter, and there's 2 options for each letter in the type, and I'll explain in as easy way as I can what they all mean.
Okay.
So the first letter is either I or E, which means introvert or extrovert. And it's a little bit different in Myers-Briggs than it is in the common meaning of those words, because introvert means like concerned with the inner world looking inwards, and extrovert is concerned with the outer world looking outwards. So that's the first letter. Then the second letter is either N or S, which stands for intuition or sensing. And those are the ways that we perceive the world, perceive reality. Sensing is pretty easy. It's just the 5 senses. How do we take in the information that is in the concrete world? Then intuition is like the patterns, the concepts, maybe the underlying meanings. So it's a little bit beyond just what we can experience with our senses. And the next letter, the third letter, is either F or T, feeling or thinking. That's how we make decisions. And feeling isn't just emotion, but it's more like what value do we place on things, good or bad, like or dislike. Thinking is the logic. Does this make sense? Does this work? And then the last letter is probably the most sketchy one. It's J or P, which means judging or perceiving. And generally, the judging types are more like organizers. They like to organize and limit things. And the P types are perceivers, and they like to gather. So they're a bit more chaotic, maybe a bit more fun, you might say. I don't know, but but that's like the very quick, incomplete rundown of it. And it's important to note that a common thing that people say against Myers-Briggs is that it's putting people into boxes, because you don't just do all feeling or all sensing or whatever. And yeah, everybody does all of that. Everyone has an inner world and an outer world, but we're just talking about preferences. Like most of the
Mhm.
time, what
Right.
do you rely on? What do you go to when you have to make a decision? What do what information do you rely on most? So I hope that was high level enough.
Well,
No,
Don't get
that
let's
too
was
lost in the
perfect.
weeds.
That
You
was
can be
Yeah.
our
perfect.
guinea pig for this for anyone who's not super familiar. So you're INFJ, which means you're introvert, intuition, feeling, and judge. I
Yeah,
mean, you're judgy,
judgy type. Yeah, I'm
right?
judgy.
Are you not? That's not the
Yeah,
He's
best.
like, I'm
basically.
owning it. I'm judgy.
Yeah, I mean, you can take that the J part to mean like, I like to be a bit more controlled, a bit more organized in the information and things
Mm,
like that.
Give us an example.
Give us an example. Well, it's sort of like for for my type, any IJ type is really going to want to do this, where it's all the information in the world that I see kind of has to be boiled down to one thing. Like I'm always trying to pull everything together to like come back to one idea.
Mm.
And that's like a very simple, probably sounds like kind of hippy dippy stuff, but like from my perspective, that's how I see it. I'm also just like in a very practical way. I'm not spontaneous. If I'm
Got it.
spontaneous, I have to have like three things that I'm choosing from to be spontaneous.
Mm.
So that's like a more practical way
And you
of
have to
looking at it.
schedule it in, like be spontaneous on Friday at 3 p.m.
Right, exactly.
So
Yeah.
how does that play into your dating life or relationship life? I'd love to hear how like you see your personality transferring over.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing and what I have tried to do, like work more towards, is I don't like to do a lot of what you might call gathering. Like the whole process of dating, going through the apps, meeting people is a lot of gathering new information in, having to sort through a bunch of stuff. And that's always been very exhausting. And so I've been the kind of guy who generally uh, just tries to date as little as possible and just get into a
Mm.
relationship with maybe the first person that I go on a date with who doesn't annoy me. So,
So you're not
um,
like a serial dater type.
no, not at all. And so that's what I've been trying to work toward, is getting more toward the go on several coffee dates, meet a
Mm.
lot of people, have, broaden the net, talk to people that I might not normally think are my cup of tea. And I think a lot of people do that naturally. I've heard of people who just like they're on dates all the
Mm-hmm.
time, and
Yeah.
maybe they need to go the opposite direction and maybe
Yeah.
limit things down a little bit. But for me, I need to go from this very narrow field that I'm always looking at and broaden it outwards.
So
You wait,
when
do
you're
you know
talking,
yours? Do you
I
know
do not.
yours?
I've never actually taken the test, but I'm just guessing what I am, and I'll take the test afterwards just to see if I'm right. I've taken the
Uh-huh.
test a long time ago, and I don't remember. But I guess when you were talking about Frank earlier with blind spots, your blind spot as a J in this is that you may not be opening yourself up to like more options out there, and
Right,
you're because you want more control of the situation, and sometimes love is not in a controlled environment,
Mm.
so
right.
might be harder that way. I would say I'm probably a P in this situation, more perceiving, because I don't have control and I'm okay letting go of control.
Mm.
Yeah,
But I do think my blind spot in this arena would be that sometimes I have a really hard time making decisions
yeah,
because I'm constantly asking, "Ooh, give me more. I'm curious about this." Now that
Mm.
opens up another door, and I end up not having boundaries and limits. So that's where
right.
I need to narrow it down. What about you, Julie?
I'm an ENTJ, so I'd love to hear how that
Oh,
breaks down in dating.
TJ. Okay, so you're J. You're J with Frank.
Yep,
Okay, so you're more of the
we're judging
control,
together.
Yeah,
Yep.
judging
yeah,
together. I love how we're working backwards. Most people go from the I and the E,
yeah.
but no, we're going backwards. Let's
Well,
go.
I'm more
Let's do it.
extroverted. I think that's the difference. However, I would say in quarantine time, I've realized I'm much more introverted than I ever thought. But I am like when I've taken these tests, like more of the E over the I.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, all right, let's go to the I and the E since we're on that. So, Frank, you're an I, you're introvert. And it's not exactly what people think it means. It's not like you're at a party and you're like a loner sitting
Right.
Right.
against a wall talking to a wall. What do you think are the key differences between the I and the E in terms of dating, I guess?
Oh, in terms of dating, I think a lot of times what it is that extroverts are kind of always looking at, I mean, depending on type, it's always different, but in the most general sense, the extroverts are looking first and foremost at either the other person or like the experience outside of them, whereas the introvert
Mm.
is looking first and foremost at like, what do I think, what do I want, or is it what do I think is going on here, what are my
Interesting.
impressions of the person. And I think the E types tend to be just more like looking outward first before they look inward to say, what do I think, whereas the introverts are like a weird other way around, where it's like, how do I feel about this first? Okay, now let me see if they can prove differently.
That's fascinating because I feel like this is something a pattern I had to unlearn is that I would always be wondering on dates, like, what does this person think of me? And I
Yeah.
never thought, like, what do I actually think about them? So that was probably like some of that E coming through.
Oh yeah, especially if
Hmm.
you are an EJ, that's like a big like because when you take the first and last letter together, that's like a way of kind of clumping all the types together in
Ah.
four groups. So the EJs in particular, yeah, that is like an EJ thing where it's like just always worried, what are they thinking about me?
Right.
Um, because your whole thing is the way you operate in the world is to be trying to bounce things off of other people all the time rather than go to yourself first. So then it causes this
Mm.
fear. That's sort of like the blind spot in a way, this fear of
Hmm.
like, oh crap, what's going to happen when, the spotlight's on me,
Interesting. And I think like
Oh.
probably to what your point was earlier, where you said that you might have to like work on having more coffee dates and like, filling that like and being open to more of that social interaction. I feel like I could literally go and talk to anyone. Like I have
Yeah.
no problem with that, but it's more of just like the like maybe fine tuning that a little, right? So I'm like going on dates where it's people that I'm actually excited about and vice versa, and not just coming out of it like, oh, that was great, but it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. I mean, there's so many other things that go into it with each type. And I also want to like point out that type doesn't necessarily explain everything. Like you can
Right.
have people
Hmm.
of the
Right.
same type who have different hangups about things just based on like their experiences with dating, etc. So um that I just want to point that out really quick.
Yeah.
There are lots of yes and but for
Right.
all of
Yeah,
these
yeah.
Well,
because we can't all be categorized in the same.
Right.
I mean, you said it earlier, like we can't get our entire personalities aren't going to be summarized by four letters.
Right.
Like
And
there's no way.
yeah, and it's obvious there's more than 16 types of people in the world.
For
We've
sure.
Right.
met them. We've met more than 16 different types of people. So it's like you got to broaden your idea of like what it's actually trying to describe. But they are like very fundamental things also, like just how do you perceive reality? It's a very fundamental thing.
So what
But
about those middle letters? Like what do
well,
those mean?
I also want to go back to the sorry, Julie. I want to go back to the I and E because we talked about the
Okay.
E, but I think the I, the blind spot, which I think I'm an I, and other people would disagree, but I'm definitely introvert in the sense that I'm so in my head and I
Yeah.
think way too much, and
Mm,
I almost check in with myself a little too much that I don't trust other people and I
Yeah.
don't trust like universal signs. I always have to check back in with myself. And the blind spot is I can't get out of my head sometimes when it comes to
mm,
dating.
that's a good
Yeah.
point. Interesting.
Moving
That
down the
is
line. Oh, yeah, Frank.
Oh, I was gonna say, well, that's definitely, and you said P before, right? So
Yes, I'm
that's
an IP.
definitely an IP thing. The IP blind spot is, just going so all in on your own, like what you think is right, what you feel, or what you think that you just like disregard what other people are telling you. And so it can be the way that I've described it before on my channel is like an IP will be walking down a trail and someone will be coming the other direction and say, hey, it splits off later. Don't go left because it's a really, really rough terrain. And so the IP will be like, okay, great, sounds good. And then they'll go left anyway because they're like, I'm not listening to him. I want to
Oh my
go
god,
left.
that's
Mm,
so you, eh?
that is
Like
very much me. I'm
Yeah.
so bad with authority. I'm so bad with other people telling me what to do or
Yeah.
warning me. That's why my parents had a really hard time raising me. But that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. So, Julie, did you know you were such a EJ while I'm such an IP?
That's so interesting that we're like the
We're the
opposites.
opposite.
It's
Opposites attract. But I guess like what other? I mean, I mentioned one about potentially like overcommitting socially for
yeah.
dating for the E. Is there any other drawbacks that you should watch out for if you are an E when it comes to dating?
For an E type, yeah, I mean that's I think the biggest one is overcommitting, which could be something that EJs in particular would deal with. E's can also just have a problem with keeping it all together, like keeping it all structured keep following through with commitments and things like that,
Mm,
just having so many things they want to do,
Mhm.
because EPs in particular get bored very easily, and so they just
mm,
want to keep going from experience to experience. And in dating, if an EP is trying to like date seriously and find a relationship, it can be difficult for them to actually like buckle down and say, okay, I'm going to see this person again, instead of going to someone new and see
right.
what's there. Or even just like forgetting, oh crap, I had scheduled 5 dates on this one day. Things like that.
Mm.
So those can be blind spots of E types just in general.
That's interesting. Okay, so let's go through these middle letters now. I want to hear more
The
about them.
N or the S? Let's start with the intuition.
Yeah, and this is a contentious one. Once you start to get into the online communities with Myers-Briggs, you start to find that there are a lot of like stereotypes and stuff, and so everyone like wants to be intuitive because it just sounds cooler. But
Sounds cool.
yeah, I mean, because the intuition, because sensing is easy to comprehend. It's like what's around us, what are the facts. But intuition is like a little bit more, up in the air, a bit more mystical. And it really is, if you want to really get it uh, super simplified, it's just relying more on the patterns that you've seen and the concepts that are in the world rather than the facts that are in front of you. So and that's a big thing in dating too, that can throw you off when you meet people and you're like, I see where this is going.
Mm,
Even if who you're seeing is like nothing like anyone else you've seen, you can accidentally put together patterns of how things are going to unfold and like exit maybe when you shouldn't have, or maybe the other way around where
mm,
you overcommit because you're like, oh, things, I see how these things all fit together.
That is
um
a really stellar point because people who want to be intuitive and say that I'm very intuitive doesn't necessarily mean that your intuition is right.
right, yeah,
And that's probably the disconnect is that we all want to be intuitive, but it doesn't mean that it could just mean that we're making up stories. I think I'm intuitive in the sense that I make up stories about people when I date them and I
yeah.
ignore the red flags. And those are the facts that are put in front of me.
Yeah, that's a thing where people can be like, how do you just ignore facts? And it's not that we don't necessarily see them, it's just that when we're thinking about what am I most responsible to, the fact that I see right in front of me or the pattern that I have seen that I think is continuing here, or the concept that I have created in my brain or that I've seen in the world that always seems to be at play. What do I trust more? What do I feel more responsible to following?
Mm. We're all N's in this group.
yeah, what is the N?
Intuitive.
Oh, that's.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, I just
Yeah.
totally missed that. So then,
it's a
what
little
is?
confusing because it starts with I, but
Yeah.
I's already
Yeah.
taken by introvert, so we have
I
to go with
was
N.
gonna
Yeah,
be like, oh, I feel like I just am exactly what you described, Julie, but that's not my letter. But now it is.
It is your letter.
yeah,
The
I
other
know.
one's
I was.
sensing.
Oh, got it. So, what
And
is the sensing? Yeah, like what qualities show up there in terms of dating?
yeah. I mean, the sensors are going to be very much, I guess the drawbacks that they might have is being too focused on appearances perhaps, or being too focused
Mm,
on just like the experiences that you're having with the other person rather than just than seeing like how can things unfold a bit more. um the sensors, their blind spot, I guess, is not understanding why things are happening sometimes, because the
mm,
intuition often explains the why. So the
mm,
sensors will know, I see what's happening in front of me, but I don't maybe understand why. So they can also not see red flags because
mm.
they'll be like, oh, I see that this person I'm dating does XYZ thing, and all these other people I've dated have done it, but oh, this probably doesn't mean anything. There's probably no pattern here. That can be,
interesting.
Oh,
yeah, that can be
got it.
pitfalls that they have. And of course, nobody does all one or all the other, but it's still at the end of the day, what do you prefer to rely on? The facts you see in front of you, or the recurring patterns that have happened?
God, oh, yeah,
That
that's
makes
interesting.
sense.
It's almost like they don't read in between the lines sometimes, so
Yeah.
they miss some of the connections that they should be making in their head.
Well, we
Okay,
definitely see a lot of people that come to us with
absolutely, and I think I'm
that.
probably like 30% that sometimes too, just not
Yeah.
reading between the lines. Yeah.
Right, or if you've ever been on a date with somebody and it just seems like you don't understand each other because you're talking about maybe like you're having a little bit of fun with some imaginative things that you're putting out there that don't have much basis in the real world, and they're just like not having it.
Uh-huh.
That might be a mismatch based on intuition and sensing. So
We also have had these episodes where we have different perceptions of the first date or a date. And I
mm,
feel like when you have like a mismatch here, that could definitely be when one person walks
Yes.
away and is like, this was the best date ever. The other person's like, I never want to see that person again.
yeah. Yeah, it's funny how those things can happen, and that can also be like the type as a whole, depending on what they've got going on. Some types are better at reading other people, or not better at it, but it's like that's what they're hyper focused on, is like
Mm,
reading what's going on with other people, and some types don't care about that, and that can be why that mix up happens.
interesting.
Hmm. Next, shall we go down the line?
Yeah.
Next
Let's do it.
is a feeling or thinking, F or T.
Yeah, I think this is the easier one to understand. So it's basically when people are making decisions, do they look at the value? Is this good or bad? Is not so much ethical value, but like just valuation, good or bad, like or dislike. And it's like, it's not. It can be either be, do I like it or does everyone else like it? One or the other. And thinking is, does this work? Is this a good idea? Does
Mm,
this make sense? And what's interesting is that I found that people can be a thinking type but be convinced they're a feeler, because there a lot of times it's very or the other way around. People who are
yeah.
feelers are convinced they're thinkers, because the decision making process can often arrive at the same conclusions. And of course, thinkers still want to make sure people are happy, like, let me do the thing that'll make people happy. But ultimately what they feel the most responsibility for is, does this make sense? A thinker will.
Mm,
And for feelers, they might be like, I'm just doing what makes sense. But it's really like, but the most important thing is everyone happy with this? Does everyone like this?
oh.
So
Ah,
it can be a little hard
interesting.
to maybe see. Sometimes people are obvious about it, but it can be hard to see in yourself sometimes.
I always feel like I'm more emotionally driven than analytical,
Yeah,
but I am actually a thinker in this at least. And
yeah,
Mm,
I think it's exactly that, is that I'm not thinking about like how does everyone feel? I'm thinking more of like my own feelings and emotions. And that might not be really like the definition of feeling as much.
oh, that's
right. Well,
interesting.
yeah, well, and each, like, if you go into the advanced, the honors
The
204
201.
class, yeah.
Yeah.
um, each type is made up of cognitive functions, which is probably too in the weeds for this discussion. But an EJ still has a feeling function, and it is introverted. So they have an extroverted thinking function, which is how they prefer to make decisions, but they're still very aware of how they feel. It's just like, when it comes down to it, I'm going to go with what seems to be making
Mm,
sense with everyone else. What is everyone else telling me works? And then what I feel about it, like, I hope it lines up. I hope what they think lines up with what I feel. And if it does, great. But ultimately, I just have to go with what they want. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so everyone is a thinker, everyone's a feeler, everyone's got all of it.
And
interesting.
Frank, you're a feeler.
Yeah.
In what way when it comes to dating?
So that can often lead to, I mean, with me, with me in particular, and I also don't want to read too much of my personal experience into the type as a whole, but feelers can oftentimes be kind of shapeshifters and want to just kind of get along and be
Mm.
a little bit more hesitant to show their true colors, especially feelers who are IJs or EJs. Uh, they might not let their true self come out very much, and so
Mm.
I've had a lot of experiences where people like mismatch on a date where people thought it was going great and I was kind of just like people thought
Oh,
people
interesting.
read a lot into me, yeah,
Ah.
that I was really like into them, etc., but I was just kind of like playing along to make sure that everyone felt good in the moment,
My
which
ex
maybe
was like that. He was
yeah.
totally like
Oh.
that. He told me that he, like, met on so many dates before when we dated, and, like, he would be like, "This is terrible," but he was just so, like, nice and just couldn't, like, ever not, just be there, and the
Yeah,
girls would, like, think that they had, like, this, like, riveting connection,
right.
so
Yeah, and so for me as a feeler, I've got to learn how to be a little bit more blunt and be okay with people being upset, which is a difficult, lesson to learn, I think, for a lot of people. And for the feelers the who are more introverted, the IPs and the EPs, their feeling is more like inward focused, and for them, the problem can be more like just going with their feeling at the expense of other people. Although they are still like feelers in general are very agreeable people, very nice people, but they'll have a harder time faking it, I think.
Yeah, so my ex, he
Mm.
told me this story how he met this girl, just like knew it was like they just didn't agree like about anything like political or just like
Yeah.
any, core things that would make someone a partner. But then he stayed out with her like all night. And then she
Oh.
thought like like at the end of the night, she's like, "Oh, are you coming home with me?" And he's like, "No." But like I'm like, why would you do that? Like from my
Yeah.
perspective, like I couldn't even fathom like why someone would do that. Like
Mm.
I would have been out of there in like an hour maybe. Like
Yeah.
I would not have stayed. But to him, his point was like my personality. I can't say I'm like not having a good time, and I'll just kind of do it.
Yeah.
So do you think feelers
You're like I've been there.
do you think feelers have a higher chance of building up resentment because they're almost like sacrificing themselves to appease the other people around them or just to avoid conflict?
Yeah, they can. I mean, some feelers are better at diving into conflict than others, and some seem like they are, but ultimately it is kind of a danger for feelers that they either don't want to express what they really think, or they actually just are so used to going along with other people that uh, they never have time to even think about their own feelings or thoughts about something because they're just trying to make the other people happy. And that can be, that is definitely an issue that the feelers can have, where and the thinkers can have the opposite problem, where they maybe need to sugarcoat things a little bit more,
Mm.
maybe do a little bit of white lies, to grease the social wheels, etc. Yeah.
Mm. I think I'm definitely a thinker.
Yeah.
I'm a little blunt sometimes.
You
Maybe a
wouldn't
little
stay
too.
out all night with someone that you had no interest in.
Yeah, and I have been told that you can tell on my face. Like
Oh
I just
yeah.
can't. I just have this disgust, look
Actually,
of disgust on
I
my
don't know.
face.
I've seen you hold
In
conversations for a while.
dating,
Maybe okay,
in
maybe that's what it
dating,
is. Because I'm like,
yes,
there's been times that I'm like, oh, you guys really engaging with this person. Then you came over and you were like, that was
I hate that
terrible.
person.
I know,
Yes,
and I'm like, what? I was like, I
yeah.
would have like come over, but it looks like you guys were like in the conversation.
I'm a feeler in everything but dating. In dating, I'm like, I don't like you, get out my face. Or I
Ah,
really like you, but in everything else, I just smile and I act like I'm obsessed with everyone when I'm secretly hating them because I'm an
So
introvert and I rather go home.
So my friends in college used to give me a nickname called Scrunchy Face because I would just make this like nose movement if I like didn't like something. I think I wear my emotions like completely on my face, no matter who I'm with.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I think so. I absolutely think so. So we went down the line. I think I am in I what did I say? INTP. That's what I am. INTP.
Well, you got to take the test to confirm, but
We do.
yes.
We do. That's my hypothesis. I'm INTP, I think. Julie, you're ENTJ,
Yep.
and Frank, you're INFJ. Okay, so we're all different. That's great. I
Yeah,
got a nice little representation here. So,
right.
with this information, we're equipped with all these skills. What do we do with them? Obviously, we can talk about the blind spots for each and everything, but it's like, first of all, how do we take in this information? And then what are the next steps?
Yeah, there's so many different ways to go about it because just from a simplistic overview, the NT types, which both of you are, well, yet to be confirmed. But the NT types generally need to like focus a bit more on their SF side, on their sensing and feeling side to
Oh,
try
it's
to
like
develop.
SF side, the San
Yeah, the
Francisco
San Francisco side.
side?
We're
Because
here
yeah,
for a reason.
yeah, so it's like this the stuff in the feelings in the
Mm,
real world, in the concrete world. Like that's, I mean, and that sounds so general, but once you start to really think about it and reflect on your life, you can start to see how, oh yeah, in this situation, especially if you are trying to be vigilant in your everyday life and catch yourself and like analyze why you're doing things, you'll start to realize, oh yeah, I am putting the thinking way in front of the feeling, and maybe I should dial it back and like do a little bit of feeling here. Maybe I should
Mm.
try to be a little bit more agreeable with people and just go along with what makes them, what they think is good, etc.
mm.
So how do
Um,
you think this plays out with like partner selection? Do you think like opposites attract, or do you think it's people that have similar personality makeups?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I've heard a lot of different theories. And one of the, like a lot of people say, you got to have at least a few letters in common. And if the two middle letters are the same, that's good because it's sort of like you see the world and act in it in very similar ways. So
Mm,
you can get each other on that level. And there's also something to be said for when you get into the more advanced stuff, that having people who are kind of more opposite, who have different letters than you. For example, an IJ type, which is very controlled and organized, matching up with an EP type who's like more all over the place. That can be really good chemistry where, yeah, opposites attract. You bring
mm,
out a lot of different stuff in each other. And a lot of like on my channel, that's like the vast majority of questions I get. I do live streams on my channel on Saturdays, and people are asking me all these questions about dating and how do these types match up. And I try to tell people like ultimately you can you can be partners with anybody. Like any type pairing could work because ultimately if you can trust someone and communicate with them, that's what a relationship needs. But the type aspect, the type dynamics can give you a little bit of extra spark or maybe turn you off from someone from the get-go, can make communication a little bit easier. So in the most general sense, I would say having at least one of the two letters in the middle being
Mhm.
the same can
Mm.
help for like uh, making things start off with a good spark, I think, because when you
mm.
can look once you become aware of this stuff, which is why it's a little bit dangerous to get into typology because you can't get it out of your mind after you've learned it a bit. But you start to meet people and you realize I'm not getting along with this person, and why is that? And you realize, oh, I'm an NF type. They seem to be, at least in this moment, acting like an ST type. Like we're not talking the same language at
Mm,
all.
Mhm.
Or you could be like, why am I getting along with this person so well? Oh, we both have the same middle letters, the NF stuff going on. Or for you guys, maybe you get along so well because you have the NT in the middle. You both are
mm,
doing the intuition and the thinking. You get each other on that level. And in dating, I think the biggest thing that you can take away from it, even if we're not like looking at specific type pairings, is just realizing people are different, and instead of being like, oh, they're weird, like they're weirdos, I can't get along
Mm,
with them because they don't, something's wrong with them, you start to realize, oh, it's their type. And you can do these weird things, these little experiments where you're like, I think this person is this type. I'm going to kind of talk to them in their language and see how they respond. And in my experience, I found like, oh, I can get along with them a lot better because I've kind of
Mm,
guessed at what type they might be and guessed, somewhat right. And that got me a little bit further along to understanding them, to getting along with them. And generally, that's what I think is the best thing about typology, besides the self development part, is understanding others, having more patience for others, being able to realize that they just see things differently, they make decisions
mhm,
differently. And that can be very powerful in dating, to open you up to new possibilities of partners. And it could also be just good in everyday life with friends, with coworkers, etc.
yeah, and I would imagine managing like conflicts that could
Yeah.
help, like when
mm,
you are in an actual relationship, like understanding where they're coming from a little better could really help kind of guide that along.
Right, because and the other thing is, like, each type has blind spots, and those blind spots come with fears, because it's almost like you instinctively know you have a blind spot. And so you'll have certain people who are freaking out about something that you would never freak out about. It's like,
mhm,
okay, your computer doesn't work. Why are you freaking out about that? But to
Right.
them, it's very real,
right.
or it's like someone else freaks out because someone said something mean to them at the store. And to you it's like, okay, I can see that's a little upsetting, but why are you fuming about it 2 days
Mm.
later? But to them it's like a very real thing. And
Mm.
it can help to just have more compassion for people, to realize they're not just weird. They're
Yeah.
like, it's coming from that very innate type fear that they have.
Ah, that's really fascinating. So, in your experience, do you think that this sort of learning each other's language and developing compassion, empathy works across the board, or are there certain types that should just not match with the other type? There
Yeah.
just is certain, just a bad cocktail of types.
No, I don't think that there are any two types that should never ever get together, but I think that there are types where it's going to be maybe a little bit of a struggle, but it all really depends. I think it's a lot different if you get to know someone in like an organic way in real life, as opposed to meeting on the apps. I think when you're doing kind of the app kind of dating, where you're really trying to sort through people quickly, type becomes more apparent, and it's harder to get along with people who are very different. Whereas if you meet someone like through some kind of club you're in, where you just happen to be around them all the time and you build experiences together, you could be incompatible, quote unquote, types, but still
Mhm.
get along because you have these shared experiences, and you got to know each other without the pressure of oh crap, I got to figure out who's going to be my partner forever. So
Mm,
um, yeah, so I would never say don't match with someone because it's your type. In fact, I would say maybe the worst match is your own type, because you're so similar that you might like, it might be like the blind leading the blind.
they drive each other
It might
crazy.
lead each other off a cliff there.
Do you
So
think people should put their personality type in their dating profiles?
That is a really interesting question, because I've seen it a lot on the profiles,
Uh-huh.
and my reaction is I don't want to see it. Even
Oh.
Oh, you don't wanna see it.
no, even as a guy who is like really into it, it's because I feel like it really depends, but I feel like a lot of people use it as like a shorthand for here's who I am, and then they don't put a lot of
Mm,
work into their
Got it.
stuff. I think you can put it in there in a way if if you have a good profile already, and as like a quirky, fun thing, you're like, I love personality stuff. Here's my type. What's yours? That could be a good conversation starter. But I see so many people who just say, I'm an INTJ. And then like it's like,
Just leave it.
okay,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean much, because it's also like people, when you take tests online, unless you're being very honest with yourself and the answers, you could get the wrong
right.
answer.
Mhm.
So
Well,
people telling me their type doesn't tell me a whole lot.
We did something like this at work, and I remember, like, before they gave you your results, they were like, we do not want to hear people being like, I am this, I am this. Like,
Yeah,
because it doesn't define you as a person, right? It's just
right.
an insight into your personality. So I think just we should kick off some takeaways, and then I definitely want to leave people with resources where they can learn some more. But I think, like, my biggest takeaway from this whole conversation is use the personality types to learn more about yourself and understand your blind spots, especially when it comes to dating, and see where you can kind of like gain more empathy for other people, gain more empathy for yourself through it, and then also like use this when you're actually in a relationship or you're in dating to understand the person or to at least start a conversation. Maybe you won't understand everything from their letters,
Yeah.
but it can at least give you perspective of where they're coming from so you could frame the conversations in a way that is healthy, that you guys can kind of further discuss what can work for you as a couple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really great takeaway. I think I would piggyback on that and say that it's so great to be equipped with these tools and to learn more about yourself and the people around you, but also know it's capturing you at a moment in time. It could
Mm,
be your personality right now, going through quarantine during COVID, during a time of social injustice. And I think it's good to do these tests every 3 to 6 months, and you can track your patterns. Maybe you just go more the NT, but your IP changes quite a bit. And that's a great way to learn about the patterns that you're creating for yourself. And I think the what you said, Frank, about creating empathy and compassion about the other people where you think they might be weird or I can't believe they think that way.
Yeah.
That's such a great point. And I think one tool we can really use is to go back to the Myers-Briggs test and these personality tests. And when you check your answer for each question, look at the options for the other answers and put yourself in those answers' shoes and think, oh, if I were to check this box, how would I view the world now? I actually think the answers that you don't check provide so much more insight into the world and the people around you. And I think we can use that as a tool as well.
for
Yeah,
sure.
that is a really great point because I think sometimes when we take those tests, we're like, oh, they just put those answers there as like, joke answers. Who would ever do that,
Right. But when they're not, right? Someone
Right. They're
actually
not
checks
someone
us.
is actually selecting them.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And especially as we're talking about this in relation to dating, the odds of you being with someone that is exactly your type, and that might not even be good in the scheme of things
Yeah.
to be with someone identical to you, it's even more important to see what the other options are so you can start relating to people.
Right. To see
Absolutely.
like the spectrum of the way that people are seeing the world and the spectrum of how they can be wired. Yeah, it's very
Right.
important.
So I know you live and breathe this stuff, but do you have
Yeah.
any takeaways that you or last parting words that you want to share with everyone with personality types and dating?
I think it's good to have this as a tool in your back pocket. I don't think that it's the end all be all. I know a lot of people like get really, into it. I think it's like a shortcut for many people. They're like, dating is so hard. I need a shortcut to find who's my right person. And personality stuff isn't so much going to be the magic bullet for you, but it can definitely help with a lot of other things you can do to be working on yourself and helping to understand other people. So just want to you know emphasize that, like I've said many times before, and I say it because so many detractors make it sound like uh, us enthusiasts of personality types are trying to say like it's everything. It's not everything, but it's a lot and it helps.
Mhm. And if
Yeah.
people want to join your live stream, that's on Saturdays at what time?
Usually it is around it's
Usually. I set you up for it.
yeah, it's
You're such an INFJ.
I do it at noon on Saturdays, noon East Coast time in the US on Saturdays. And the short link to get to my channel on YouTube is infj.me/sub, SUB.
And they can also just look up your name on YouTube too,
Yeah,
Frank
if you just go to
James.
YouTube and type in Frank James, my face will pop up everywhere. My face from 2 years ago when I had long, greasy hair, as well as my face now when I have a more a better haircut.
And that's
So
how we found you, because your videos are hilarious too. I think that's the
So
thing
good.
is like we wanted a mix of someone that knew their shit and knew what they were talking about, but
yeah,
also someone that could deliver it in an entertaining and, just relatable way.
I just love that if someone Googles you, that this article on Quora pops up where they're like arguing if you're actually an INFJ.
yeah,
Someone's
it's
like,
a
"Do you know he's really INFP?" And I don't believe this. He's an
Oh my God.
INFJ. There's like a
yeah,
scandal, Frank.
it's a point of contention. A lot of people in the Myers-Briggs world online, they like to debate type. They like to. It would make a good story if I was mistyped, wouldn't it? You know?
I mean, if that's your biggest scandal that comes out, I think you're in good shape. So.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
still sleep at night.
Do you, outside of your YouTube channel, do you have any other like resources that have helped you that could like help other people just get more awareness?
Yeah, I've learned through a lot of different means, and I think if online, there are a ton of different places that pop up. I know that Truity is one,
Hmm.
Mhm.
truity.com is one that comes up as a good resource for people. I have a buddy, his name is Eric Thor, Eric with a K, Thor. He has like his own thing going on, and it's a bit more advanced, but he has a lot of good stuff. I've learned a lot from another program called Objective Personality. They have a class. The thing is, once you get into it, you realize everyone has their own take on it. And then if you just get a book, that can be good. There's like the official Myers-Briggs book that a lot of people read and is a good start is Gifts Differing.
Mm.
And that's like the official if you want the pure stuff. And if you want to go way back, you can read Carl Jung's Psychological Types, and that's where it all started. And it's actually kind of short. It's a little bit like difficult to understand if you're a newbie, but it's definitely very insightful.
Awesome. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Frank. And if you enjoy this episode, enjoyed our conversation with Frank, then please leave us a review in our Apple podcast. We were able to get Frank because he read the reviews and said, yes, these girls are legit. It's a real podcast. I will go on it. I will give them my time. So the more reviews we get, the more guests like Frank we're able to get as well. And if you don't want to leave us a review, just take 2 seconds, give us 5 stars. We won't take anything less. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
It's a free country. Whatever.
And we
you want.
had such a nice moment with Frank when we approached him. He's like, I listened to your podcast. I'm so excited. So I think the more friends you can keep telling about the podcast, that also unlocks better guests and just allows us to continue to grow.
Yeah, and whether you're an INFJ, ENTJ, INTP, ABCD, whatever you are, we want to hear your perspective. This is your platform to tell your stories and share your perspective with everyone else. So if you want to be a guest on our show, just head to our podcast website or a website that is about our podcast. It's dateablepodcast.com. Thanks again, Frank, for your time. And we'll head over to your YouTube page very shortly after this.
And we'll
Awesome.
link it
Thanks
in
so
your
much.
bio too. So it'll
Yeah,
be in the show notes also.
We
great.
usually
Well,
wrap up by saying stay dateable on the count of 3, and we sing it like crazy people. 1, 2, 3. Stay
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 dateable.
dateable.
dateable.